Thank you for doing that, and thank you to Professor Gamal and to you, Dr. Jehan, for this invitation today and for including me in the talk. I'm afraid I don't know if you can see my.
Yes, we can see your presentation.
You can see the presentation.
Yes.
I've had some technical problems, so I'm probably just going to talk. I'd hope to show you a few more images, but I will mostly be talking. What I wanted to sort of contend with today was that I'm the director of an organization that's called the Council for British Research in the Levant, which is one of the British international research institutes that work through the British Academy in London. And we're actually 8 institutes in total, including the British Institute for the Study of Iraq, as it's currently known. And we are one of the partners in the Nahrain network as well, that I heard one of our distinguished colleagues here also speaking about. We're very old. The British International Institutes for Research in the Levant, CBRL itself was founded as the British School of Archaeology in Jerusalem in 1919, a very significant date and period after the end of the First World War, and at the beginning or just before the setup of the Mandate period. So we're about 100 years old, and it's been a massively changing and period, obviously, for those who know the region well. Major events have been, of course, the conflicts from 1948, but the British School of Archaeology of Jerusalem, as it was then known, continued as then part of Jordan. But in 1967, the Six-Day War meant that East Jerusalem became divided from the East Bank of Jordan. I'm talking to you now from Amman, from my home actually. And so between 1967 and around 1998, 2 institutes were established for the Levant. And in 1998, in what I sometimes describe as the optimism for of the peace, the 2 were brought back together again under the heading of Council for British Research in the Levant. And since 1998 until 2020, we have been coming back together again, combining 2 old institutes, but actually within countries where it's difficult to travel or work between them. And if I can and it's been very interesting that since COVID and with modern technology, in some way, our organization is starting to come back together virtually to work to bring Bilad Hashem, or the countries of the Levant, back together. And one of the things that I would also note for the Engage network is that I have actually been coming to Jordan for 30 years. And one of my first memories is actually 1990 and the first Gulf War. And I've never, in all of that time, managed to visit Iraq, which is which is a great sadness. So it's a particular pleasure to join in with this workshop, which brings us together and is led by the Iraq group. Because having spent certainly the last 10 years living in Jordan, and particularly in Amman, which has become a hub. I learned recently it's now the largest urban capital in the countries of the Levant. It's become a home in 30 years to people from Iraq, people who came during 2003, 2006, people from many diasporas. And through getting to know members of these different communities, I've learned an appreciation for the Baghdadi, especially university culture. I work with colleagues, many of whom were trained in Iraq before the most recent conflicts. Okay, this is all a very long way of saying CBRL and the British International Research Institutes have been working in the region for a very long time and were in some senses born from a colonial era and have in the last 20 years or so been considering, and particularly now are considering, our place and how we relate and how we build partnerships. For CBRL in particular, what happened in 1998 when the British School of Archaeology in Jerusalem and what was then called the British Institute at Amman for Archaeology and Heritage came together, was that we broadened our remit. I would say pre-1998, people would tend to think about archaeology or say archaeology in terms of our institute. But since 1998, 2000, it's emphasized more on the concept of heritage, emphasizing the values that people put within the past, and less, if you like, on the specialism and technique and tool that archaeology has given us. Also, what happened is we broadened to cover the whole of Bilad al-Sham, the whole of the Levant, in a sense trying to bring this region back together, the Mashrek. Often the Levant, which has its own particular identity, gets very much bundled up with the Middle East, but the Middle East itself is so diverse that our organization is trying and pushing to define at least our region, as many other people from the Middle East and North Africa would also no doubt concur in looking at their particular identity and their transition into modernization. Or what is called modernization. The other thing that happened is that we broadened up our study to everything that we do in the social sciences and humanities. So we started to study refugees, literature, sponsor scholars who studied the Arab uprisings, who studied history, who studied the Mandate history. And I find myself at this particular point in time, especially through partnerships that have been initiated through the Global Challenges Research Fund and UKRI and AHRC, finding that these strands of heritage, archaeology, anthropology are being brought together again and looking at each other and seeing how they can work together. So I was particularly intrigued by the way that the Engage network is embracing the idea of humanitarian heritage and what that means, and what it means also to our organization and how we work. We often describe ourselves as embedded. So I find myself at this point in time feeling equally Jordanian as I do British, and feeling how can we bring these two strands, their strengths and what we have learnt together. But also, Dr. Jahan kindly gave a summary of my portfolio and what I do, and I'm actually the first director who is not a director who runs excavations, although I was trained in archaeology, but I was trained in something called environmental archaeology, and also in ethnography and anthropology and botany as well. And my life has been a study of rural life, encompassing for my PhD the fellahin of the peasants or the rural populations, the Bedouin, the people who are somehow in between, who sedentarized, and their architecture, so tents and houses. And now, more recently, I've become interested in the vernacular. I have studied vernacular architecture, but I now have colleagues who also study Amman and its architectural heritage, because that tells the story of the development of a truly modern Arab city of the last 100 years or so. So where do we as a British International Research Institute find our place? And how do we, it's a very much used word, how do we decolonialize in the contemporary period? And this is something that we are very much looking at. What we find we are becoming is a repository of information, a collection of people who share a history of Jordan and our region, and also I feel what I myself have contributed to is a colleague very kindly called me a godmother of intangible or traditional heritage in Jordan, in that I had the privilege as a PhD student 30 years ago to live with families in Jordan and learn about, for want of a better word, traditional farming. That at that time it was being, people didn't value it. I was talking to a generation who were going, why do you, a British person, value this? And my grandchildren, they don't understand me. They don't know what I'm saying. They don't understand the words. One of my party tricks was naming all the names of the agricultural weeds in Arabic at the time. But now, and interestingly, in Jordan, and with COVID again, it was happening before, and certainly in Palestine before, because of the loss and the tragedy of the loss of land and heritage there. People are refinding community, and they're refinding the ways that they used to do things. And there is an echo in the background in COVID of a return to go back to the land. And Bedouin, I know, who were all engaged, as we all were, and I've done it myself in tourism projects. When COVID started, Bedouin I knew went back to their herds and back and back to their tents. A small population, but they certainly did. And I think it's that a lot of humanitarian efforts, as they of course should, go around crises, refugees, the terrible explosion in Beirut, which seems to have been more the result of negligence and, I can use the phrase, crony capitalism in a rebuilding of a country that was not to everyone's advantage after a terrible civil war. So it's to ask the question, 100 years of conflict in this region, rapid neoliberalism, as many of my political scientist friends would say, for the last 30 years. Displacement from rural to urban, displacement between countries that's been forced. And I would say some of the people I know who are Jordanian feel as violent a transition between their grandparents and their children because the lives are so totally different. How do we manage this? Where do the bounds of humanitarian begin and end? And also, I come at a point when many of the social scientists that I speak with, are deconstructing the word humanitarian, because while in theory coming from a good place, it's often from the global north to the global south. It's often, aid is not necessarily always neutral. There is such a thing as dollar diplomacy. And where we as academics, as practitioners, considering the future and what we want to do, and particularly as a director of an organization where I feel it's a huge privilege to be here. It's a huge privilege to have lived and to work with my colleagues. Where can we best serve? Where can we best give back? What do people here want to know from the side of me that comes from the UK and the connections that we can bring from that? But also, my life has been massively enriched by living here, by being part of here. And there's so much that I feel that the Levant can give actually to the world in an approach to life. And there's so much that I have learned in a Bedouin tent or in a field weeding or in a house talking about mud and how you use mud. And so I guess I wanted to use this opportunity to just share some of those thoughts. My apologies, I'd hoped to share more images with you, but I'll do that at another time and when I've more mastered the technology. But I would encourage you to look at CBRL's website. The website is there. Find me on LinkedIn. You'll find a lot of what I've done is there, and on Google Scholars, you'll find the range of where I work, or contact me. I think the organizers will be able to give you my email directly. or send me a message and talk to me. I'm often better. More time if we talk. And so if you do, you will be contributing to CBRL's strategy for the next 3 to 5 years and possibly longer, possibly the next 100 years as well. Yes. Thank you.